Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling forgiveness.
Forgiveness.
Ooh, that's a big one.
Yeah, it is. And we've
It's a
got,
heavy topic.
it is a heavy topic, but fascinating too.
So much to unpack with this one.
And we've got research,
Yeah.
personal stories, and even some philosophical insights
Nice.
to kind of dig into.
I love it.
And the interesting thing about this is we're not just talking about forgiving others,
Right.
but also the often overlooked power of forgiving ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which can be even harder sometimes.
I think it is forgiving ourselves.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is, when I think about forgiveness, I think of,
Hallmark movies.
yeah,
Right.
like very cheesy,
Yeah.
like letting go of the doves,
Yeah,
and that kind of thing.
But
But,
what if I told you that there's a solid scientific basis for it?
okay, now that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because when I think of forgiveness, I don't think of like science.
Right.
I think of like
Morale.
spirituality.
Exactly.
But actually there's a lot of research that's been done on forgiveness, and it's really fascinating stuff.
So tell me, what does the science of forgiveness actually tell us?
Well, imagine this. Studies from Stanford University have shown that practicing forgiveness can actually reduce cortisol levels, which is a major stress hormone, by up to 25%.
Wow, 25%.
That's huge.
Yeah, that's huge. I knew stress was bad for you, but I never connected it to like holding on to anger.
Yeah, it's a powerful connection. When we hold on to resentment, it keeps our bodies in this sort of low-grade fight or flight mode.
Interesting.
And over time, that chronic stress can lead to all sorts of problems.
Right,
High blood pressure, a weakened immune system, even heart issues.
Wow.
Forgiveness helps us break free from that physiological stress response.
So it's not just about, being the bigger person or letting someone off the hook. It's literally like a health upgrade.
Yeah,
It's pretty compelling motivation to at least try to forgive.
absolutely. And it goes beyond the physical, too. Think about all the mental energy we waste.
Ah,
Replaying old hurts, obsessing over what ifs.
I do that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Forgiveness frees up that mental bandwidth, allowing for clearer thinking, better focus, even a boost in creativity.
It's funny you say that because I always thought of myself as someone who holds on to things, like rehashing arguments in my head way after they're over.
Yeah,
Maybe that's why I can never find my keys.
that's a great point. Holding on to those negative thoughts and emotions, it's like carrying around a heavy weight.
Yeah.
It weighs you down, it distracts you, it prevents you from moving forward.
Okay, so we've got stress reduction, mental clarity. What about relationships?
Yeah,
Does forgiveness play a role there?
it's essential. Forgiveness is like a bridge that can help reconnect people after a conflict.
Yeah.
It fosters empathy and opens up the lines of communication.
So it's not about pretending nothing happened or even condoning bad behavior. It's more about acknowledging the hurt and then making a conscious choice to move forward in a healthier way.
Exactly. It's about releasing yourself from the grip of that past hurt
Right.
so that it doesn't define your present or future. It takes real strength to do that.
This is all making a lot of sense. But let's be honest, forgiveness can feel incredibly difficult,
Yeah,
even impossible at times. Why is that?
that's a really important question. And there are a few key reasons why forgiveness can be such a challenge. One major barrier is the fear of vulnerability.
Okay.
When we've been hurt, it's natural to protect ourselves, to put up walls. And forgiving can feel like lowering those walls, leaving us exposed to the possibility of being hurt again.
It's like taking a risk, putting your heart back out there when it's already been bruised. I can see why that would be scary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a deeply ingrained belief that forgiveness requires an apology.
Oh, yeah.
We feel like we can't truly forgive until the other person acknowledges their wrongdoing, makes amends, almost like they need to earn our forgiveness.
Right.
But here's the thing, waiting for that validation can leave us feeling stuck, powerless, and prevent us from healing.
That's an interesting point. So are you saying that we can't always control whether the other person takes responsibility for their actions, but we can control our own response?
Exactly. Forgiveness is an internal process. It's a gift you give yourself, a decision you make for your own well-being, regardless of the other person's actions or apologies.
Right.
And sometimes, perhaps the most challenging form of forgiveness is forgiving ourselves.
That's hitting close to home.
Right.
I think a lot of us are tougher on ourselves than anyone else.
Absolutely.
So why do we find it so hard to forgive ourselves?
It's often tied to guilt and shame. We get stuck in a cycle of self-punishment, believing that holding on to those feelings is somehow noble, that we deserve to suffer for our mistakes.
Yeah.
But that's a dangerous trap. It keeps us trapped in the past, prevents us from learning and growing, and ultimately undermines our self-worth.
This is all resonating with me so deeply.
Good.
I've definitely been guilty of holding myself hostage to my past mistakes. So if we know all this, why do we still cling to those negative feelings? Are we just wired to resist forgiveness?
I wouldn't say we're wired to resist it, but there are definitely some common misconceptions about forgiveness that keep us stuck.
Okay.
Myths that make it seem impossible or even undesirable.
Okay.
Maybe if we debunk those myths, it'll make the path to forgiveness a little clearer.
I'm all for busting myths.
Okay.
Let's do it. What are some of the biggest misconceptions you've come across?
One of the most pervasive myths is this idea that forgiving equals forgetting. People assume that they have to completely erase the memory of the hurt in order to truly forgive. But that's just not true.
Okay.
It's like learning to ride a bike.
Yeah.
You might fall and get hurt,
Yeah.
but you don't forget the experience, do you?
No.
You learn from it and you become a better, more careful rider.
Okay, that's a great analogy. So the memory is there,
Yeah.
but the sting is gone. You've learned from the experience, but it doesn't have the same emotional hold on you anymore.
Precisely. You've processed the experience. You've extracted the lessons and integrated it into your personal narrative. Now you can move forward without that heavy baggage.
I think another common misconception is that forgiveness equals weakness. Like you're letting the other person off the hook. But honestly, choosing to forgive after being hurt, that takes guts.
It absolutely does. It's much easier to stay angry,
Oh, yeah.
to hold on to resentment.
Yeah.
It takes real strength and courage to confront the pain, work through it, and choose a path of healing.
Yeah, it's like staying stuck in the mud is easy.
Yeah.
But it takes real effort to pull yourself out and keep moving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, there's this myth that forgiveness requires reconciliation.
Okay.
People think that in order to forgive, you have to rekindle the relationship or welcome the person back into your life. But that's not true at all.
Wait, so you're saying you can forgive someone and still set healthy boundaries?
Yes.
Like it's not a free pass for them to hurt you again?
Exactly. Forgiveness is about your internal state.
Yeah.
Your freedom from those negative emotions. Reconciliation, while it can be a positive outcome, is not a requirement for forgiveness.
Yeah.
You can forgive someone without ever having to see them again if that's what's best for you.
Okay, so we've busted some myths, and we're starting to see forgiveness as this powerful choice, a path to freedom. But let's get practical here. What can someone actually do to start cultivating forgiveness in their own life?
That's where it gets really interesting. There are actionable steps you can take,
Okay.
a roadmap to help you unlock this incredible power within yourself.
All right, I'm ready for my forgiveness roadmap.
Okay.
Let's dive in. What's the first step?
It all starts with acknowledging your feelings. Don't try to bury your hurt, anger, or disappointment. It's like trying to heal a wound without cleaning it first.
Yeah.
You need to acknowledge the pain in order to allow it to heal.
So we're not talking about suppressing those difficult emotions, but actually leaning into them.
Exactly. Give yourself permission to feel those emotions fully without judgment. Journaling can be a powerful tool for this, or talking to a trusted friend or therapist. The key is to create a safe space for yourself to process those emotions in a healthy way.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like before you can even begin to mend a broken bone, you have to acknowledge that it's broken. You can't just pretend it's fine and expect it to heal properly.
Exactly. So once you've acknowledged your own feelings, the next step is to try to understand the other person's perspective.
Wait, hold on. Understanding the person who hurt me?
Yeah,
I'm not sure I'm ready for that step.
I hear you. This step can be challenging, especially when the wounds are fresh. But remember, understanding doesn't equal condoning. It's not about justifying their actions,
Right.
but rather attempting to see things from their point of view. Hurt people often hurt others. They may be acting out of their own pain, insecurity, or unresolved trauma.
Okay, so it's not about excusing their behavior, but about trying to cultivate a little empathy,
Right.
even for the person who caused us pain. That's a tough one, but I'm willing to give it a shot. What are some ways to develop that kind of empathy?
One powerful exercise is to try writing a letter from their perspective. Imagine stepping into their shoes, feeling their emotions, and expressing their thoughts.
Interesting.
It might help you gain some insight into their motivations, or at least see the situation from a different angle.
That's an interesting idea. It seems like a good way to challenge my own assumptions and maybe break free from some of those judgmental thought patterns I've been stuck in.
It is. You might even consider reflecting on their past experiences. Have they faced traumas or hardships that might be influencing their behavior? It's not about excusing their actions, but understanding the complexities that contribute to human behavior. And this step is especially important when it comes to forgiving ourselves. We often judge ourselves more harshly than anyone else.
Oh, tell me about it. I can be my own worst critic. So how do we apply this understanding step to ourselves?
Treat yourself with the same compassion you would offer a friend. Think about what you would say to a friend who made a similar mistake.
Yeah.
Would you berate them,
No.
or would you offer understanding support and encouragement?
I'd definitely be a lot nicer to my friend than I am to myself in those situations.
Right.
So the challenge is to extend that same grace inwards.
Exactly. It's about silencing that inner critic and replacing it with a voice of compassion and understanding. And remember, you're not alone in this.
Yeah.
Every single one of us makes mistakes. It's part of being human.
Okay, so we've acknowledged our feelings and tried to understand the other person's perspective. Even if it's ourselves we're trying to understand.
Yes.
What comes next on this forgiveness journey?
This is where it gets really powerful. The next step is to make a conscious decision to forgive.
Hold on. Are you saying we can just decide to forgive?
Yes.
Even if we don't necessarily feel it yet?
Exactly. Forgiveness is a choice, an act of will. It's like planting a seed. You might not see the results right away, but with time, nurturing, and care, that seed will grow into something beautiful.
So we plant the seed of forgiveness even if the soil still feels rocky and unforgiving.
Yes, and that's where the next step comes in.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat here. What's the next step?
Letting go of the need for an apology.
That's a tough one. I think a lot of us get hung up on waiting for that apology,
Yeah,
that validation from the person who hurt us.
it's a common trap. We feel like we can't truly forgive until the other person acknowledges their wrongdoing. But here's the problem. You might wait forever for an apology that never comes. And in the meantime, you're letting their actions control your emotional well-being.
That's so true. It's like giving them power over our own happiness.
Exactly. Forgiveness is about reclaiming that power. It's about recognizing that you can choose to forgive regardless of whether the other person takes responsibility for their actions. Remember, forgiveness is for you, not for them.
That's so empowering.
It is.
It's like taking back control of your own narrative.
Yep.
You're no longer defined by what happened to you, but by how you choose to respond.
Exactly. And this applies to self-forgiveness as well. We can get stuck in a cycle of guilt and shame, punishing ourselves for past mistakes.
Yeah.
But true self-forgiveness requires letting go of that need to punish ourselves. It's about acknowledging our imperfections, learning from our mistakes, and moving forward with compassion and grace.
It's like giving ourselves permission to be human, to be imperfect, and to learn and grow from our experiences.
Precisely. And remember, forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. There will be days when you feel progress and days when you feel like you're taking 2 steps back. But the important thing is to keep moving forward, to keep nurturing that seed of forgiveness you've planted.
This is all so insightful.
Yeah.
It feels like we've already covered so much ground, and yet I'm eager to learn more.
Yeah.
Can we hear those personal stories you mentioned earlier?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Stories have a way of bringing these concepts to life and showing us the real-world power of forgiveness.
I'm all ears. Let's hear them.
So the first story is about a man who lost his son in a tragic accident. The driver was at fault. And as you can imagine, the father was consumed by grief, anger, and a thirst for justice.
I can't even begin to imagine the pain he must have been going through.
Yeah.
It feels natural to want someone to blame,
It is.
to want them to pay for what happened.
It is. But this father, after months of wrestling with those emotions, made the extraordinary decision to forgive the driver.
Wow. That must have been an incredibly difficult choice.
It was. But he realized that holding on to anger wouldn't bring his son back.
Right.
It would only poison his own heart and keep him trapped in a cycle of pain. He wanted to honor his son's memory with love, not hate.
Yeah.
And he knew that forgiveness was the only way to do that.
That takes such incredible strength.
It does.
To choose forgiveness in the face of such profound loss.
Yeah.
It's truly inspiring.
It is. And it highlights a crucial point. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of resentment, anger, and pain.
It's about choosing peace and healing for yourself even when it feels impossible.
Exactly. And speaking of seemingly impossible acts of forgiveness, the second story is about a woman who struggled with immense guilt and self-blame after a failed relationship.
Ooh, self-forgiveness.
Yeah,
That's something I think we can all relate to on some level. We can be so hard on ourselves.
absolutely. This woman blamed herself for everything that went wrong in the relationship. She replayed every mistake every argument, every perceived flaw over and over in her mind.
I've been there. It's like that broken record of self-criticism just keeps playing in your head.
It does. And for years, she carried this heavy burden of guilt and shame, convinced she was unworthy of love or happiness. But eventually, she had a realization.
What was it? What helped her shift her perspective?
She realized that this constant self-flagellation wasn't serving her or anyone else. It was keeping her stuck in the past, preventing her from moving on and creating a better future for herself. So she made a conscious decision to forgive herself.
It sounds like she finally acknowledged she was only human, that everyone makes mistakes, and that holding on to those past mistakes was only hurting her.
Exactly. She began to treat herself with the same compassion and understanding she would offer a close friend. She focused on learning from her mistakes and moving forward with grace and self-acceptance.
These stories are so powerful. They really illustrate that forgiveness is possible even in the most difficult circumstances. And it's not some lofty, unattainable ideal. It's a choice, a process, a journey we can all embark on.
It is. And those practical steps we talked about earlier can provide a roadmap for that journey.
Right, our forgiveness roadmap.
Yes.
So to recap, we start by acknowledging our feelings,
Yes.
then try to understand the other person's perspective, and then what was that crucial third step?
The third step is where the real transformation begins. We make a conscious decision to forgive.
Even if we don't feel ready, even if we're still hurt and angry.
Yes. Remember, forgiveness is an act of will, not a feeling. It's like choosing to plant a seed in the ground even if the soil isn't perfect.
Right.
You trust that with time, nurturing, and care, something beautiful will grow.
Okay, I'm starting to get this. We plant the seed even if the conditions aren't ideal. What happens next?
Next, we have to let go of the need for an apology. This is a big one. It's so tempting to hold on to that need for validation, to wait for the other person to acknowledge their wrongdoing and ask for our forgiveness.
I think it's a natural human response. We want to feel justified,
It is.
to know that the other person understands the pain they caused us.
It is. But the truth is, waiting for an apology can be a recipe for disappointment and further resentment. You might wait forever, and in the meantime, you're letting their actions dictate your own emotional well-being.
So we're giving up our power, handing them the keys to our own happiness.
Exactly. Forgiveness is about taking back those keys.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that you have the power to choose peace and healing, regardless of whether the other person ever takes responsibility for their actions.
That's incredibly liberating.
It is.
It means that our own happiness doesn't depend on the actions of others. We have the power to choose forgiveness, and in doing so, we choose freedom.
That's beautifully said. And this applies to self-forgiveness as well. We often hold ourselves hostage to the need for self-punishment, believing we don't deserve forgiveness until we've suffered enough.
Oh, I know that trap all too well, the endless cycle of guilt and shame. But how do we break free from that?
By extending the same compassion to ourselves that we would offer a loved one. Remember, we're all human. We all make mistakes. And holding on to those mistakes, berating ourselves endlessly, doesn't serve anyone.
It's like we're holding ourselves captive to the past, preventing ourselves from experiencing the joy and freedom at the present moment.
Exactly.
Right.
So we decide to forgive ourselves.
Yeah.
We acknowledge our imperfections, learn from our mistakes, and choose to move forward with grace and self-acceptance.
This is all so powerful and insightful.
Good.
But I have a question. What if forgiveness just doesn't feel possible? What if the hurt is too deep, the anger too intense?
That's a valid question.
Yeah.
And it's important to acknowledge that forgiveness is a process, not a switch you could just flip on and off. It takes time, effort, and sometimes even professional guidance.
So it's like building a muscle. It might feel weak and shaky at first, but with consistent effort, it will grow stronger over time.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And remember, forgiveness doesn't mean condoning or forgetting. It simply means choosing to release the negative emotions that are holding you captive.
It's about reclaiming your power, your peace, and your freedom.
Exactly. And there are tools and practices that can help you along the way.
Like what are some practical things our listeners can do to cultivate forgiveness in their daily lives?
Well, one practice that I find incredibly helpful is mindfulness meditation.
Oh, mindfulness. I've heard a lot about that lately. What's so great about it?
Mindfulness helps us become more aware of our thoughts and feelings in the present moment without judgment. And that's crucial for forgiveness because often our resentment and anger are fueled by thoughts that keep replaying the past or worrying about the future.
So by focusing in the present moment, we can create space between ourselves and those negative thoughts. It's like pressing the pause button on that broken record in our heads.
Exactly. And there are many guided meditations specifically designed for forgiveness. They can help you develop a sense of compassion, both for yourself and for others, and create a more peaceful internal state.
I'll definitely have to check those out. I'm all about practical tools I can actually use in my everyday life.
And don't underestimate the power of journaling. Writing about your experiences, your feelings, and your struggles with forgiveness can be incredibly cathartic.
It's like having a conversation with yourself, a way to unravel those tangled thoughts and emotions.
Exactly. And sometimes you might discover insights and perspectives you weren't even aware of. You can track your progress over time, notice patterns, and celebrate your small victories along the way.
Journaling is definitely something I'm going to incorporate into my own forgiveness journey.
I highly recommend it.
Mm.
And remember, you don't have to go through this alone. Sometimes simply talking to a trusted friend or therapist can provide the support and perspective you need.
It's true. Sometimes just having someone to listen without judgment can make all the difference.
Absolutely. Sharing your burdens with someone who understands and empathizes can be incredibly healing. And remember, forgiveness is not just about letting go of negative emotions. It's also about cultivating positive ones, like compassion, kindness, and understanding.
That's a great point. It's not just about subtracting the bad, but also adding in the good. So how do we do that? How do we cultivate those positive emotions?
One powerful way is through acts of kindness.
Acts of kindness. How does that relate to forgiveness?
When we do something kind for others, it shifts our focus outward, away from our own hurt and resentment. It reminds us of our interconnectedness and our capacity for love and compassion.
So it's not just about being kind to the person who hurt us,
Right.
but being kind in general.
Yeah.
It's like spreading kindness as a way to cultivate a more forgiving heart.
Exactly. It can be as simple as offering a genuine compliment, lending a helping hand, or simply listening attentively to someone who needs to be heard.
Those small acts of kindness can have a ripple effect, making the world a little bit brighter, one interaction at a time.
And it's not just about making the world a better place. It's also about making ourselves better people. Acts of kindness help us cultivate a sense of gratitude, purpose, and connection, which are all essential ingredients for a fulfilling life.
This has been such a rich and insightful conversation.
It has.
I feel like I'm starting to understand forgiveness on a whole new level. It's not just about letting go of the past, but also about embracing the present and creating a brighter future.
That's beautifully said. Forgiveness is about choosing freedom, healing, and growth.
And it's a journey we can all choose to embark on one step at a time. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'd love to hear a bit more about those personal stories you mentioned earlier.
Of course, I'm happy to share them.
Perfect. Let's hear them. All right, so we're back and we're talking about forgiveness. We were just talking about some pretty powerful stories
Right.
about people who really embraced forgiveness.
Yeah, amazing stories of resilience.
Really inspiring stuff.
Yeah.
But, I think it's important to acknowledge that, forgiveness isn't just a one-time event.
Hmm.
It's an ongoing process. It's a journey.
Absolutely. It's like a muscle we need to exercise regularly. The more we practice forgiveness, the stronger we become, and the easier it becomes to access that wellspring of compassion within ourselves.
Okay, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So how can we keep those forgiveness muscles flexed and strong? What are some practical things our listeners can do to cultivate forgiveness in their daily lives?
Well, aside from mindfulness and journaling, which we touched on earlier,
Yeah.
there are many other powerful practices you can incorporate into your daily routine. One that I find particularly helpful is loving kindness meditation.
Loving kindness meditation. I've never heard of that. What is it?
It's a beautiful practice that involves cultivating feelings of love and compassion, first for ourselves, then for others, and eventually for all beings. It's a way to intentionally shift our focus from judgment and resentment to acceptance and kindness.
That sounds lovely. How does it work? Do you just sit there and think nice thoughts?
It's a bit more structured than that. You typically start by focusing on yourself, repeating phrases like, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be peaceful. Then you gradually expand that circle of compassion, sending those same well wishes to others.
So it's like a ripple effect of kindness.
Exactly.
Starting with ourselves and then expanding outward.
Exactly. And the amazing thing is that as you practice loving kindness meditation, you start to notice those feelings of compassion and forgiveness spilling over into your daily life. You become more patient, more understanding, more forgiving of yourself and others.
I can see how that would be a powerful tool for anyone struggling with resentment or anger. It's like a way to rewire your brain for kindness.
It is. And remember, forgiveness is not just about letting go of negative emotions. It's also about actively cultivating positive ones. And one of the most powerful ways to do that is through gratitude.
Gratitude, I've heard that's a good thing to practice. But how does it relate to forgiveness?
When we focus on what we're grateful for, it shifts our attention away from what's missing or what we've lost. It helps us appreciate the good in our lives, even in the midst of challenges. And that sense of appreciation can be incredibly healing.
It's like those times when you've been feeling down and then something small happens, like someone holds the door for you or you see a beautiful sunset, and suddenly feel a little lighter, a little more hopeful.
Exactly. Those small moments of gratitude can have a profound impact on our overall well-being. And the more we practice gratitude, the more we notice those moments. It becomes a habit, a way of seeing the world.
So we're not just waiting for big dramatic events to feel grateful.
Right.
We're actively seeking out those little glimmers of goodness in our everyday lives.
Yes, and those moments of gratitude can act as antidotes to resentment and anger. They remind us that even when things are tough, there's still beauty and goodness to be found.
That's such a beautiful way to look at it, and I think it's especially important when we're struggling to forgive. It can be so easy to get caught up in the negativity, to focus on what's wrong or what's unfair.
It is. But gratitude helps us shift that focus, to appreciate what we have, and to recognize that even difficult experiences can teach us valuable lessons.
So we've got loving kindness, meditation, gratitude practice. And what else can help us on this forgiveness journey?
Remember when we talked about the importance of understanding the other person's perspective?
Yeah.
Well, one of the most powerful ways to develop that understanding is through empathy.
Empathy. That's about putting yourself in someone else's shoes, right?
Yeah.
Trying to see the world from their point of view.
Exactly. And it can be challenging, especially when you've been hurt by someone. But empathy is not about condoning their actions or excusing their behavior. It's about trying to understand their motivations, their fears, their vulnerabilities.
So even the person who hurt us is a complex human being with their own story,
Right.
their own struggles.
Exactly. And when we can see them as a fellow human being, flaws and all, it becomes a little easier to let go of the anger and resentment.
It's like remembering that everyone is fighting their own battles, carrying their own burdens.
Yes. And sometimes those burdens lead them to make mistakes, to hurt others, even unintentionally.
It's not about excusing their behavior, but understanding that their actions are often a reflection of their own internal state.
Exactly. And empathy is a skill we can develop just like forgiveness.
How do we do that? How do we become more empathetic people?
One way is to simply practice listening. Really listening with your full attention to what others have to say. Not just waiting for your turn to speak, but truly trying to understand their perspective.
That's a good one. I'm definitely guilty of interrupting or formulating my response while the other person is still talking.
We all do it sometimes.
Yeah.
But when we make a conscious effort to listen attentively, it creates space for empathy to emerge. It allows us to connect with the other person on a deeper level, to see the world through their eyes.
It's like stepping outside of our own limited perspective and expanding our awareness to include the experiences of others.
Exactly. And that expanded awareness can be incredibly transformative. It can help us break free from judgment, cultivate compassion, and ultimately become more forgiving people.
This has been such an insightful and inspiring deep dive.
It has been.
I feel like I've gained so many practical tools and perspectives on forgiveness. It's not just about letting go of the past, but about actively cultivating compassion, gratitude, and empathy in our daily lives.
That's beautifully said. Forgiveness is a journey, and it's a journey worth taking.
It is. And it's a journey we don't have to take alone.
Absolutely. There are so many resources available to support us along the way. Therapists, support groups, spiritual communities, even online forums and podcasts.
Exactly. We can learn from others who have walked this path before us, share our struggles, and find strength and inspiration in their stories.
And remember, forgiveness is not a sign of madness. It's a sign of strength, resilience, and a deep commitment to our own well-being.
Well said. Forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves, a path to freedom, healing, and wholeness. And it's a gift that keeps on giving, rippling outwards, touching the lives of those around us, and creating a more compassionate and forgiving world.
Beautifully said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the transformative power of forgiveness. We hope you found it insightful and empowering.
And remember, forgiveness is a practice, not a destination. Be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself, and keep moving forward one step at a time.
Until next time, keep diving deep,